You know, what Larry Kudlow said on our air earlier today was that he believes that what's going on with Huawei and what's going on with the China-U.S. trade talks are on separate tracks. Can they really be separated in that fashion?
I think what's important to note is, here we look into bear market territory and why are investors actually doubtful over the longer term hopes of truce. And really here, I think what has been evident from the midterm elections and some of the language coming out of the midterm elections is that it remains all too politically convenient to blame the wealth creation of another country, i.e. China, for domestic problems here at home.
So what exactly does that mean in terms of whether or not you think that this arrest will make any difference in the trade talks? It sounds like you think it's a much bigger problem.
Much more endemic problem.
A much more endemic problem. Can it be solved in 90 days?
Much more longer term problem. I would be doubtful. I do not have a crystal ball, but I would be doubtful. And I would say more private equity kind of negotiating tactics staying on, so potentially tariffs remaining, potentially not an escalation.
I'll move on from Huawei, but I just got to ask you simply, does the arrest make a deal harder or not?
I would say that it's very difficult to have a deal full stop.
And so, in that sense, it doesn't matter, really.
Correct.
It doesn't matter what happens with the Huawei because
these are more underlying dynamics.
It's a separate thesis. Yeah. I'm curious as to why there seems to, explain it to me, why there seems to be a disconnect between what the administration is willing to put out publicly and what the Chinese seem willing to talk about publicly. Our administration is very proud to trumpet the idea that we're going to get agricultural products in, the reduction or elimination of tariffs on automobiles made in the United States going in there. But the Chinese have said very little. What's going on? Why? Explain that to me.
Certainly we have different cultures here, and you can even see that with central banking policy, right? With going back to the Fed statements to the markets versus the PwC. We're in sort of transition as to what we communicate to the markets. Even when I help our clients and I look at, until things are done and dusted, signed, sealed, and done, it's still up for negotiation. So with regard to China, I think you'll see less communication until we actually see things fully signed, dotted, and sealed.
Does it matter in the days after the G20 meeting, there were many discussions and debates over the differences in the statements that were being made and what Trump was tweeting and what various administration officials were saying. Do the Chinese follow all of this? Do they just sit back and scratch their heads, do you think, and say, I don't know what they're talking about. This is what we know. And what we know is that we never put a dollar amount on the amount of goods that we were going to buy. We never set a time frame in terms of the number of days, things like that.
What I think is important to note is that China is a very pragmatic market economy, and they act very pragmatically. So you'll stand back and say some of the statements may look to be a bit unbalanced coming out. Some of them may not be completely synchronized. And we've had that with previous administrations and any kind of economic and foreign policy, diverging statements coming out from different parts of institutions. But what I would say is that China is pragmatic over the longer term. They're going to be long on America over the longer term and work in the best ways to be able to secure a good deal going forward. And I think what's interesting to note is also not just the attention to America, but the outbound activity with regard to the EU, cleaning up act with the EU with regard to Shinzo Abe in Japan. So you're seeing formal geostrategic links being embedded with other trading partners, and I think this is a wise approach.
Let me ask you just in sum, are we economic partners, more partners with China or more rivals with China?
A good dose of competition is healthy. What I would argue is that the problem is not with U.S. imports, it's with U.S. exports. How do we make our services exports and where the job growth and the wage growth is actually happening in America more competitive?
Well, the services part of it is really critical here, isn't it?
Correct.
I mean, because that's what we do best and most.
Correct.
And if China will buy more of those as they seem that they are going to indicate they're going to do, that can be a big mover of the trade imbalance.
And guess what? We need an export market for our services. And guess what? If you look at the consumption patterns in China, it is towards services. And you look at the rebounding of some of the stocks there as well.
Services just like what PwC supplies.